forming questions at the end, anything that you'd like to ask us, and we'll go from there. So my name is Andrew Hardy. I use he, him, his pronouns. I'm the Assistant Director for Residential Life, and I'm here today as the Lambda Society Advisor, our LGBTQ plus group on campus. We have Brittany Williamson, she, her pronouns, with the Office of Student Advocacy and Accountability, and Dr. Will Rogers, an Associate Professor of English, he, him, his pronouns. So for today's discussion, we just want to establish some group norms. We are here in a learning setting. So number one, be smarter than your phone. It's not only distracting to us as presenters, but it may be distracting to the person next to you. So make sure that you're aware of that. Please stop and ask us any questions as they come up. We'll be more than happy to talk about those. That's what we're here for, to learn. Number three is the Vegas rule. We'll do the modified Vegas rule, which is, what stays in Vegas, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Same thing here. What is said here, what is talked about here, and the questions that we ask, that stays here. What you have learned from this is what you take from here, and that's what you go out and share, okay? We want this to be a safe space for you to discuss and ask those questions, but what you learned and take away, what you learn and take away, that's what leaves here. Laugh with us as things happen. We'll make mistakes, we'll flub over our words, so this is a fun opportunity for us to talk about that. So if there's the opportunity, go ahead and take it. Share the airtime, as this is a learning opportunity for us. We want to make sure that everybody can get their questions asked, so again, share the airtime. And number six is feel free to change your mind, okay? While you may have had some preset notions coming into today's conversation, you're more than welcome to change that. You're more than welcome to solidify that. Just be open to the opportunity to change your mind, okay? So first, we're going to have Dr. Rogers talk about the history on pronouns and talk about how it comes to today.
Sorry, it's Halloween. I'm teaching Macbeth today, so I'm playing Macbeth, and I'm going to have a question and answer session in Shakespeare about sort of historical truths in the play. Anyways, so I wanted to talk about pronouns and their weird history in English, which suggests something like there's not really a historical antecedent for people to say pronouns have always been this way. I also just want to say from the beginning that while I can make this argument, and it's a good argument, I don't think it matters more than people's current lived experience, right? Like, even if the pronouns showed us something different from Old English, they don't. Even if that were true, that wouldn't be enough to say, oh, you can't use they, them. Just doesn't matter, right? But if you need another weapon in your arsenal to convince someone to acknowledge your existence, though you shouldn't have to, here it is. So these are the pronouns. These are what we might call the cases. That's a little bit of a misnomer. But anyways, you can see they're quite odd. There's a lot of grammatical gender inflecting these. Many of them haven't changed all that much from Old English. I will say, in terms of the things that we need to think about are these, the they, them pronouns, and she. There's not really a consensus on where she comes from, right? And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Next slide. All right, so these are the Old English pronouns. You can see they're much, much different. And in fact, our you pronoun is originally a second person plural, right? That we've lost the second person singular pronoun altogether. And so the fact that people use y'all is in fact trying to recover some of that original second person plural. Lots of distinctions. Where you see different forms, that is an acknowledgement that Old English manuscripts, which mainly survived toward the end of Old English, which is around the 10th and 11th century, there are multiple different forms. Heo is this sort of majority, would become the she, but there's not a process by which it will actually do that. So where she comes from is hard to say. Two other things I'd like to say here. The dual pronouns no longer exists. The only place you hear the dual pronouns is when someone says to wit, comma, this is blah, blah, blah. That actually means to us, right? And so the dual pronouns are us, you and me, whatever that is. The other thing to keep in mind is that the they, them pronouns do not exist for Old English because they are not Old English. They are Old Norse. Old Norse and Old English are cognate languages, and from the 8th century on, there is a lot of contact between people who speak Old English and people who speak Old Norse. And in fact, there's an entire section of England that's called the Danelaw that's controlled by what we might think of as the Vikings, right? And so one thing I just want to point out here is that he, the nominative masculine in the third person, and he would have become the exact same pronoun given enough time. That I and he would have collapsed. So the theory goes that they borrowed because they knew that things were sounding too close, right? So there's already been a lot of weirdness with the pronouns, even around year 1066. That's the Norman invasion, and that's when Old English ends. And so the other thing I want to say is that this becomes thou and you, right? And that system of singular and plural second person exists basically through early modern English, right? So, next slide. And so these are your Middle English pronouns. You can see things have changed. This is basically our system. It's much, much, much simplified, but you know, the TL semicolon DR version of all of this is that language does change, right? And so one of the things that I am hoping you'll leave here today thinking is that when someone identifies with a pronoun and it seems odd to you, or it doesn't seem to follow grammatical rules, grammar doesn't control us. Grammar describes the way we use language, not the other way, right? There are some prescriptivist tendencies I hang on to. The Oxford comma, pull it out of my cold dead hands, right? But otherwise, right, like grammar describes how we use language and the sort of conventions and arbitrary nature by which we decide that. So if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, things get even more weird in early modern English, right? You still have the thou and thee versus you and ye. I am so angry every time I watch a film about early modern England and they use thou as some sort of formal greeting. This is the greeting you use either with someone who's subordinate to you or someone who's intimate and familiar. So you wouldn't, so for example, King James Bible, 1611, every time you see thou, and it's between God and the reader of the Bible, it's because the King James version of the Bible is predicated on this sort of personal relationship with Jesus and God, right? So it has not been a possessive pronoun before the 17th century. That's another change. And this weird change here too, the his genitive. Instead of using, you might say God, his works, right? That would be the same as saying God's works. So there's a movement in early modern England to sort of pull that out and make it its own sort of thing. I have to tell you, the S for plural and the S for possession is the same S, right? They both come from the same sort of Old English and Old Norse, coupled with Old French. There's a lot going on. Morphologically, on the level of the form of the language, that's the same. So again, the TLDR here is that this is really different, right, from how we use them today. So the historical argument, next slide please, is that we can change language, and we do, depending on how it works best. Y'all is technically not standard English, but again, I've included it in peer-reviewed publications, and that's another thing you can pry from my cold dead hands. It is perfect because it's gender non-specific, and it doesn't entail any sort of weirdness about knowing people's gender or knowing their identity. The two last things I want to get to, and I'm going super fast so I don't take other people's time. Reagan's been in class with me, and so is Chloe. They can tell you that I can go on forever should I need to, but I won't. I will say that the sort of historical argument might also be that these are never preferred. They were never preferred pronouns. They were just pronouns that described people's grammatical gender, through grammatical gender, describe their identity. They do so today. So when I ask students if they want to use different pronouns, I also couch this in a way that it's not about preference, it's about identity. And folks can change, right? So Judith Butler is my dissertation grandparent, right? When I got my dissertation, Judith Butler identified with she, her pronouns. Now they identify with they pronouns. And it's because over time, even someone who's a queer theorist like Judith Butler has realized that their identity is different. And so I still trip up. You heard me trip up just there. But like really problematizing preferred and acknowledging that people identify how they identify. And finally, language change, right? We may rant and rail about the Oxford comma or whatever, but if language is understood by the majority of the speech community, if it does its job in communicating, then it's not our job to say necessarily, well, this is how it should be, or this is how the grammar book tells me it's supposed to be, right? We can have all sorts of different registers for language, but at the end of the day, I'm a descriptivist through and through. Grammar describes what we do. It doesn't control what we do. All right, that's it. Okay.
So to bring this on and to carry this into today's conversation, we're going to talk about a little bit about some core vocabulary so that we can distinguish between the two, and then we can go into the purpose of today. So some of the vocabulary that we would like to be separated out is a lot of times the word gender and sex are used interchangeably. For the sake of today's conversation, I want you to split those two things, okay? When we refer to sex, we're talking about the biological part of a person. When we talk about the gender, that's when we talk about the identity of the person, okay? So cisgender is the gender description for someone who was assigned the gender at birth. You go, oh my gosh, you've had a boy or a girl. That was put onto somebody. And that person today still continues to identify with that. So that is what a cisgender person is. Our gender expression is our display through others. Not all men dress the same way. Not all women dress the same way. You choose to present yourself to other people. And what a lot of people will do is make inferences on what they think that makes you, okay? So the expression is how you choose to, your combination of clothing and grooming, demeanor, social manners. Your gender identity is the internal perception of one's gender and how they choose to label themselves. I got this from the LGBTQIA Center from UC Davis. These are some of the common pronouns that are used today. As you can see, it is a very extensive and what may seem to some people strange list, okay? It is also very individualized to the person of what pronouns that they would like to identify. So for today's conversation, we will be focusing here on the ones that we commonly think about, okay? So what we've done today, or what we're going to do today, is to learn how to use correct pronouns, and that how we can use those in engaging in learning, educating, and advocating for our students with the inclusive use of pronouns for all. So what are pronouns? Pronouns are the word used in place of your proper name. Some examples include she, her, or gender-neutral pronouns, they, them. And some people use specific pronouns, any pronouns, or no pronouns at all. Using the singular they has been used in English for centuries, and we are still struggling with this, but remember, it does take practice. Why focus on pronouns? You may have noticed some people sharing their pronouns at the beginning of a Zoom meeting, or maybe during, maybe in the bottom of their email signature to let you know. Maybe they include it on their name tags. This gives everyone in the room the opportunity to self-identify instead of letting other people assume someone's identity or the pronouns that they use. Including your pronouns is the first step towards respecting people's identity and creating a more welcoming space for all genders. How is this practice more inclusive? Pronouns can sometimes be a signifier for someone's gender identity, but not always. We don't want to assume people's gender identity based on expression, typically thrown through their clothing, how they present themselves, mannerisms. By providing an opportunity for people to share their pronouns, you're showing that you're not assuming that their gender identity is based on their appearance. Getting a little tongue-tied now. So what do you do if you don't want to share your pronouns? Does anybody have a guess? That's it. It's okay. All right? You don't have to. Okay? That's the point of all of this. Providing that space and that opportunity for people to share their pronouns does not mean that everyone feels comfortable or needs to share their pronouns. What it does, though, is it does signify to the people in the room to say, hey, I understand this at least a little bit to a point, which may allow that person to come up and speak to you, to feel comfortable sharing with you maybe their gender identity, their sexual identity, the pronouns that they use, the preferred name that they would like to be called. It does show an openness and a willingness to do that. Some people share that may not share their pronouns for a variety of reasons. Maybe they're still questioning, maybe they're using different pronouns and they don't know which ones to use just yet. Maybe they don't want to use pronouns. Maybe they would like you to refer as their name every single time. They don't feel comfortable sharing them in the moment or maybe in that space. They fear bullying, harassment. After sharing, they may feel it may put them in danger. But in the case where pronouns are left off, where you don't know, just refrain from using pronouns as best that you can for that person and refer to them by, what is their name tag or what they shared, the name that they shared with you. Mistakes and misgendering. It's going to happen, okay? This is a learning process and it takes practice. I constantly catch myself, rewriting an email to try not to gender a student because I don't know that, okay? But even us, we still catch ourselves. Misgendering refers to the experience of labeling another as their gender other than the one that the person identifies with. Because many, not all, associate their pronouns with their gender identity, using the wrong pronouns intentionally or unintentionally is a form of misgendering. You may ask yourself, what do I do if I misgender someone? This process changes, okay? This is highly individualized to that person. If you are in the room with the person, and let's say the person corrects you, you can say, thank you, I apologize, we accept it, we move on, and you do better next time, okay? If the person is not there and you know better, you do it for next time, okay? It takes a habit forming. If somebody changes, let's just say, let's go with a name, a preferred name. It may take some time for you to change that. But a lot of you will know me as Andrew as far as on a search or anything like that, but I do go by Drew a lot. So not only do preferred name and pronoun play a role into all this, it has applications outside of anyone who may be identifying as transgender or who uses a different pronoun than how they present. So for example, this is Alex. She is one of my college students. If you're corrected because Alex uses they, them, their pronouns, you say, sorry, they are one of my students. thank you, they are one of my science students. You do this all the time already, and you don't even think about it. There was a court scene from a TV show where the judge was misgendering the plaintiff, and the lawyer corrects and says, you know, my client uses the they, them pronouns. They go back and forth, what does that mean? I don't know. When you see something they use the example of a lost dog, okay? You see a flyer, somebody's lost their dog, and, you know, you report it missing, or you report it found. You say, oh no, someone lost their dog. I hope they find him. I hope they find their dog. You're going out to a friend's house. I don't know who's going to be there, but I bet they will be fun, okay? Whether it's a singular person or not. Okay, we're going on a trip. I'm sure we will enjoy ourselves, or they will enjoy themselves. Everyone makes mistakes. Take accountability and continue to use the correct pronoun. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just wanted to ask questions as it's going on.
Sure.
That's a good example for me to learn. I think I'm learning. So, in that example, what I ascertained was that when a person says they, that can encompass everybody? That's what I said, they lost their dog, because they don't know whether.
They don't know if it's a single person, they don't know if it's a family, you know, you don't know if it's, you know, a bunch of people living in one house, you know, sharing all rent, like, you never know. So that's why we focus on the they, them part of it, because it can be, they can be used in the singular, and they can also be used in the plural.
It's a thread, and it said that, John Edwards lost a dog. And I wanted to say, I'm sorry, and I see the name John Edwards. If I said, I'm sorry, would that's probably something I would say, so, so what?
I think it's fine to, I have to say, I think it's fine, right? Like, again, back to the, I'm sorry.
You're fine.
That, you know, like, that scholar in my field still goes by Judith Butler, right? And so people, when they read their work, they always say she. My students this semester, and you said, okay, just so you know, Judith Butler has come out as non-binary and identifies with they, them pronouns. But I still do it because Judith is, for me, a gender name, and it's gender as a woman, a cisgender woman. So I think we just have to have the grace to
Be correct.
Right.
I think it's also, though, in today's society, more and more people are using names that are gender specific to one for the opposite gender. So sometimes that comes into play as well, like maybe not John, but like my kid, I named my kid, her middle name is Blake, which is traditionally a male name. So I think while it is a traditionally male or female, sometimes you can still, if you think about continuing to use they as much as you can, then that way you don't make that mistake. So it's just one of those things you just practice. So it is human nature to be like, oh, John, yes, he. But if you're like, okay, John, but I don't want to assume, so I'm just going to use they, then it encompasses everybody and makes sure that you don't make that mistake.
And that's a very good point, because I started to use Alex as my example, and then for me, Alex can be a male or female, and so that's why I said John. Then I thought, oh, well, Johnny, you know, because I've known women that were named Johnny, and then so it can, but again, that's why it's important to be asked, to be somebody who will ask and somebody who will tell, and for us to receive that information without being, like, getting our feelings or getting mad or whatever, because I got some education here.
Yes.
Then and there seems very utilitarian, right? Like, I can work for a lot of situations. Is it rude if someone says no, hi, goodbye, one of the other various ones we saw on the first string, and I don't know how to use it, so I just start saying they or their name only? Is that, you see what I'm saying? Like, I feel like that would be rude if I just generalize and said they, them, there.
I think, so in that case, again, like we said, this is individualized to each person. In there, be honest with them. Admit that you're maybe not familiar with that set of pronouns, and say, you know, do you mind if I use they, them, there. In most cases, where a lot of these, I would venture to say, 95, 98%, the person is going to more likely be open to you even having the conversation with them to say, hey, I want to respect you, how can we, come to this? There may be some people who would be offended that you would misgender them by the pronouns that they choose not to go to. But in most cases, I feel that people are still learning and that they understand that. So in that case, I would be honest and have that conversation with them.
There's also thing about, as an assistant for a university, how do you make sure that this is built in from here on out, right? It's not a major thing that comes up a lot right now, but we're talking this with the holidays and everything else coming up. These things are all going to become more of a, as we become more diversified and everybody just have this is not insulated from this is this out.
Yep.
So I don't know, just trying to figure out how to do best
For- Right, for us, I think that we chose to focus today on the they. No, that's fine, we understand. We gave you the list of some examples, and that list is not all inclusive that we showed earlier. But
People also make it not make it their own, but some things just don't exist for some people, and so they find what best fits them. It's the same with choosing a different name. It's the same with choosing to, if you choose to label yourself with a gender. Some people just don't, and I think that that's probably one of the hardest things for a lot of people to wrap their mind around. But even with all of the research and all of the studies that have been done, it's still not going to fit everybody.
I will also say, I think pronouns can just be hostile in and of themselves, right? So I tell my students this, I run a first name class, right? So I try not to refer to them as pronouns, and I try to make sure they know each other's name. There's nothing more hostile in a class sometimes than, I really disagree with what he said or what she said, right? So a lot of this can just be avoided if we kind of short circuit that real natural urge or cultural urge to just go to the pronouns, right? I know this means as a professor we have to learn names, right?
Well, like my department gets presentations across campus when I would actually have a built-in population, so,
Right.
Again, we're gonna be communicating a lot.
Right.
And so, maybe it's subsequent presentation, how we do it.
And I know that, I'm sure that y'all have as well, but when it comes to policy and policy writing, refrain from the he, she, his, her responsibilities. I know that that's one thing that I've done in the residential lifestyle.
Yeah,
and
we
it's
use
been done in the
students for
student handbook
everything
as
we
well.
can. And there is a part of the presentation about gender inclusive language that we will get to. Now.
That's up to Brittany.
No, you are fine. No, I'm good. Thank you. So, I'm gonna talk a little bit about how to show your support and how to make it visible. Because again, not all students are gonna feel comfortable, not all students are gonna come up to you just dry and be like, hey, my name's Brittany, I use she, her pronouns. Some people just, especially in the South, there's a lot of stigma that it's not a safe space. And so, I just wanna talk about a little bit about how to make your space a safe space. So I do this, and I encourage everybody in this room to do this, but if you do not have your pronouns in your email signature, that is a big thing, that a student told me once and I've had it there ever since. And it's simple, it's not, email signatures, we use it every day, and you don't ever have to change it, don't ever have to move it. Drew has in his, why pronouns matter, and it takes you to, what's the website? Listen. It takes you to Listen to kind of explain why pronouns matter. So it gives a little bit of history without actually having to give somebody the history. They have it right there if they are interested. So I definitely encourage that as well. I wear a lapel pin that says she, her, that has my pronouns on it. Every time I do a presentation or every time I wear this blazer, it just stays on it. And then if I go to a conference or something along those lines, I will either bring it and put it directly on my name tag, or I have been to conferences that had stickers. And so I encourage that if you are hosting an event that has name tags, maybe buy she, her, a couple of gender she, her, he, him, they, them, or just by their own that says pronouns, and they can write their own. Just that way it's there. They don't have to use it if they don't want to, but some people may feel comfortable putting it on there. And then when you meet that person, they don't even have to tell you because it's on their name tag, right? When you meet somebody at a conference, you read their name tag and you learn their name, whether they introduce themselves or not. I know sometimes I forget to introduce myself, just because I'm awkward and shy and I just stand in the back of the room a lot, but it is nice to feel inclusive. Something that Dr. Rogers said too is at the beginning, he asked students their pronouns in class, which is awesome. I wish everybody at this university would do that, and I will encourage everybody to do that. Some people also call their students by their last name instead of their first name in case the student has not been able to change their name in the system. Or, as Dr. Will said, just call them whatever they want you to call them.
As long as it's clean.
Yes.
I always have to say that,
Okay.
because one
Let me
time
fill
I was
that out.
asked to call someone something not clean.
If you want to do it in a more personal manner, instead of asking students to announce it out loud, you can pass out a note card, have the student write their, whatever their legal name is, their preferred name, and then what pronouns they use, and then that way you have it to go back on as well. So you're not just trying to remember what that person told you at the beginning of class. Again, add to the emails. Because the more you see it, the more normal it becomes. So the more that students see it, the more that they're like, okay, what is this about? Why do I keep seeing this? And the more students who do use they, them pronouns feel comfortable knowing that you understand that those pronouns matter. It's too many buttons. So there's a little bit of tip. Some tips for gender neutral language. Again, I don't think Drew said practice enough, so I'm going to say it again. Practice always. I have a friend who just started using they, them pronouns this semester. I have known them for 3 years, and they just started using they, them pronouns, and so when I have a conversation with them or about them, it is very hard for me to not misgender them because I have only known them as one way, and now that they have found themselves and have become more comfortable, they're a completely different person and much happier, and it's just a wonderful thing to watch them grow and find who they are. And so just that alone is enough to make me care enough to make sure that I don't misgender people. I think mistakes happen. I think I've misgendered them to their face, and they're just like, they don't care, but some people do. And I think it's important just to, if they correct you, please apologize and just move on. It's really not hard to just not be mean, right? So it's, somebody asks you to use something, it's not hard to just be like, okay, I can do that. It doesn't really take a lot out of your day to just do what somebody asks you to do. I think we do that every day, all the time anyway, especially as educators. I think the university asks us to do stuff all the time we don't necessarily want to do. So I think we all should be okay with that. And then I think another big one, like whenever we were talking about using students, is when addressing group of people, to just not use pronouns at all. Like you're talking about siblings, third graders, students. We use students a lot. I use students as much as I can. Y'all is up there because of course it's wonderful. But we don't have to say brothers and sisters. We don't have to say you guys. We don't have to say ma'am and sir. We can say doctor, professor, instructor, students. Any of these are acceptable and gender inclusive.
Is guys?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that. Because I'm not from the South, I say you guys a lot. So
Yeah.
now I just saw that and I said, oh my goodness, I might need to stop that.
I will say that I say you guys as a gender inclusive noun or pronoun. I did not make this PowerPoint, but
Okay, so again, this is the information presented today during this segment is from Listen, which is they specifically work in education with LGBTQ plus issues. Guys in itself, you say guys and girls,
Right.
is gender specific.
yes.
So again, it's not, for
the sake of this conversation, I would probably say, yes, train yourself to maybe come up with something else. One of the things that I think that I actually have it on a different slide, but it's all about using linguistics, digging a little bit farther than just what the base is to be able to address the people. Yeah.
I mean, man originally man's a weird noun, and I can talk all the way about how like weird a noun it is. It's a very old noun, but it also used to function as one in Old English. So you would say man, and it meant everyone, right? It was just indefinable. So, for what that's worth, I use dude as not gender non-specific. Yeah, I mean I feel like that's a Texas thing. I'm from Texas. Everyone just says dude.
I say bro a lot. I call everybody bro. It's super professional and I absolutely love it. My kid calls me bro, like we just, yes, it is, slang really confuses people and does, but I use bro as a non-gender pronoun all the time. But I do with people I'm comfortable with, like I'm not gonna go to a meeting and talk to Dr. Salisbury and be like, bro, listen, you know, cause it's just not.
But we presented to the baseball team, and I can think back and think I said, guys. You know what I mean? And it meant group of men.
Yeah. You have to think about your audience and the environment that you're in, and how you choose to speak.
Now, I'll say, you guys, everybody, cause I grew up with people just saying, you know, you guys, it could be for females, we just say you guys, you know, that just meant everybody here. But now I'm conscious, and I probably would have the time to say this later, but I'm gonna say this now when I conclude, that this is why we have these, because it's so educational. I know I learned a lot, and now I know that I have some work to do, so I can show that I have evolved and I'm learning more so. But you guys, that was something that just meant everybody. To me, that was the equivalent of you all, and that's what I thought. The South said you all, where I came from, and you said you guys. Now I gotta think about it.
So now I'm gonna pass it over to Chloe. She's gonna read from a student's perspective.
Okay, so this is from a student. Their name is Artemis, and they were not able to attend because they have class during this time, but they wrote down something for me to read off for them. So this is not me speaking, this is for Artemis, but they just weren't able to be here. So they wrote, "Hello all, my name is Artemis and I use they, it pronouns. Growing up, I've always felt detached from what society defines as being a girl. I could never figure out why saying pronouns such as they, them, and neopronouns were not taught to us. When I finally began educating myself, I learned how I felt using they, them, and I began to further explore myself using it, its. When I first came out to my friends, I was shocked at the love and support I received and how easy the switch was for them. Sometimes I feel alienated because I'm usually the only non-binary one, but I have never felt more accepted by myself using these pronouns. Recently, I've opened up to my professors using they, them, and my preferred name. I felt so validated hearing my name and pronouns being used in an educational setting, something that I never got to try in high school. When people respect my pronouns, it gives me so much happiness, and I love seeing people come around to the idea that they, them, and neopronouns are actually real and not something you find in media today. I'm still exploring my relationship with gender, but they, it works for me, and I've never felt better." And they said thank you. And then I was gonna share, as I was sitting down, I was thinking about like pronouns and specifically myself. So I've had Dr. Rogers like 3 or 4 times, like every time he starts the semester the same way by asking students like, what name, like before you ever call roll, you'll normally say like, what name do you want to be called? And then it'll go down the rows and everything. So there's never an opportunity for somebody to be called by the wrong name. So that like really stuck out to me, and that was something I really appreciated, even though my birth name is Chloe and I go by Chloe. But also you make sure to like allow an opportunity for students, hey, if you don't feel comfortable telling me right now in class, email me or come up to me and tell me your pronouns. So for me, I don't know if you guys know on Instagram, you can put like your pronouns. And for me, I never thought it was like always just she, her, whatever. But then for some reason, I was like, of course I wanna put my pronouns on Instagram, like it's really important to me, cause it's something I'm very passionate about. But when I went to put she, her, I was like, ooh, that kinda feels icky. I was like, wait, I don't know why this feels a little bit weird, cause I've always used she, her pronouns. So then I put them in my email signature, and for some reason I was like, I mean, yeah, I'll just use she, her there because no one looks at it there. Like, I mean, people do, but it's like, it's not as important. Like on Instagram, it's the first thing you see when you go to people's pages. And so then now I feel like for me, I identify as like a queer woman. So I feel like right now I'm on the cusp of like she, her, she, they. But just having people like Dr. Rogers, that I've taken his class and like very inclusive and really make sure to prioritize it. Sorry, Dr. Rogers, if you're embarrassed. It's like, it's really, really like important. So as a student, it like really showed me, because I feel like one reason I was reluctant and still am, like, do I want to use she, her, do I want to use she, they, is because I'm like, oh, other people won't want to use it. Like my parents won't be accepting, my professors, like it's just easier to be she, her. But like people like Dr. Rogers and like Dr. Salisbury and Ms. Gina, like I know would be willing to use them. Like it really means a lot, so it makes me be like, oh yeah, maybe I can identify in a different way. So it really is important for students like me or like Artemis. So we really do appreciate like when people try to be more inclusive, because it really helps us become more in tune with our identity. So that's all I had for me and for Artemis, and thank you guys for listening to both of us.
Can I say something really quickly, right? Again, professor, so I love to talk, right? One thing is, right, like, yes, apologize for misgendering, but I've been guilty of this, and this is why I'm telling you. Don't apologize to such a way that you center yourself and force the other person to be like, no, you're a good ally. This isn't like blah, 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 right? Like, take your lumps, apologize, move on, right? Because so often historically excluded people are made to feel like they have to make the white person, the straight person, feel like they're not bad, and that's not their job, right? The other thing is, you know, you don't have to agree with anything we've said here, I think, today, but just ask yourself, like, what's more important? This deeply held identity that this other person has, or your, like, knowledge from a grammar book about, like, how language works? I mean, I'm not trying to be a jerk, but, like, when things matter to someone else more than they matter to me, this is how my marriage works. I let it go. I'm like, okay, well, this is not, like, my fight, right? Like,
I'm not married to that.
yeah, I'm not the hill I'll die on, right? So.
And I would, like, and I appreciate what you said, what you read from the student, because sometimes faculty members can get caught up. I know you're not gonna believe that, but they can get caught up into, well, this is what it says in the paper, this is what whatever, and I'm not gonna do it, and et cetera. And now we, from them, you know, and he just left, but asked for, you know, follow-up opportunity. I can see follow-up opportunity to go to the faculty, to the staff, meeting or whatever, and talk about it. Because I'm just saying, what does my signature say? I want individuals to know that I've taken the time to get educated. You know, I want to have students who feel included. And this is something that we've heard twice. The last presentation, the last lunch and learn we had on sign language, that person, when somebody takes the time, that they might not be prolific in sign language, but they take the time to know how to say, hello, my name is, what's yours, makes them feel included. I'm sure that if somebody sees your signature and sees the pronoun, that makes them feel included. So these are some of the things that we, meaning myself, somebody who's been here sometimes, can do and has learned why that's important. Yes, Dr. Ross.
I wanted to mention about, I noticed that they have gender inclusive like language for large groups of people, like friends. And I realized, like, when teaching my class, I do that all the time, and I never thought of it as being, you know, gender inclusive, but I do say, hey friends, all the time, just to include everyone. And I think too, something else I always did in my classes when I was teaching biology, in the class, was ask them, like, you know, I would often have students with longer names or with, you know, just names that aren't traditional to America. Maybe they're, you know, students, international students or whatever. And I would ask them, like, a lot of times they would give me shortened names. And I would say, well, what do you prefer? You know, and they would lot of them would say I would prefer my name, you know, but it's just easier for people to say. So I think that, you know, for me, I always strive to say someone's name and make sure I learn how to say their name correctly. And I feel like it's no different from a pronoun. Like my daughter's name is Brave, and people, when I call to make her doctor's appointments, people always think she's a boy for some reason. I don't know. They'll say like, okay, how old is he? Like, but as easy as it is to say, oh, you know, she's a girl, you know, normally people are like, oh, okay, I didn't know. So as quickly as I would be to, you know, correct them, I think you have to be equally as receptive to accept that correction from other people. But it was very interesting. So I love the longer list of pronouns, and I have to do more research.
I have a quick question. So I often like send a lot of group emails, like especially to like my day job and when I used to work in newspapers. I'll send it to like a lot of people, like professors, like people that in a really professional setting. And I struggle because I don't want to be like, hi guys, and they're like my professor, like you know someone like that. But it's also it can be hard to like say like hi blank 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 blank. So like how would you go about saying something like that in like an email or something where you're not really face to face?
They use all of folks.
Yeah.
Okay, I use Warhawks a lot.
Right. Yeah.
Like hey Hawks, hey Warhawks, something along those lines. Because then it will hit the students and faculty because everybody on campus is considered a Warhawk. And it shows a little bit of school spirit, even though I don't show a lot of school spirit a lot of times, it shows a little bit.
Good morning all. Colleagues, maybe, just depending on the setting that you might be using.
Friends is a good one as well.
Yeah.
Maybe not to your professor.
Yes, sir.
Can we get a rundown, or maybe in the future, a rundown of how to add pronouns to the Warhawk email? Because I don't remember that being done.
Yeah.
To add your signature,
Yes.
we can go through that with you right after this.
I mean, I will say that like folks is a very, very old word, right? Like English, like all Indo-European language, comes from an older, a language older than Sanskrit. But like folk has existed for probably 3,000 years. And so it's a word that works. And I guess I know I'm not supposed to keep talking, but Lord, I can't help myself. But, you know, like, even as we might say these things are complicated, there have always been ways to avoid the complications. They has been used with an indeclinable singular antecedent since the 12th century, at least, or probably earlier. We just don't have the sources. It's been used with a singular antecedent. So say John went and dropped off their clothes at the cleaners, right? That's something that's really old. And maybe some of the rules we have about pronouns are not as old, right? Like the sort of grammar rules about pronouns largely date from the 18th and 19th century. So the more you know.
Drew, I do have a question.
Yes.
So I know you and I have had many discussions about this. And this is probably when I was just gonna wait and ask you when I got back to the office, but I figured everybody else may, benefit from it. But Chloe stated that you use she, they. So I guess my confusion is she and they. Like I use she, her, hers. So, but to me, that's two different
Sets.
Yes.
Two sets of pronouns.
Yes. Yeah, okay.
I don't want to speak for you.
No.
In that case, I would take that or view that as Chloe accepts both.
Right.
That was
You can
kind of what my
use-
thought was, but I didn't want to make an assumption.
You
And
can
I
use
didn't get to point you out, Chloe. I just knew that it is what you had stated earlier.
You can use the she, her, hers, or the they, them, theirs.
Yeah, normally I have a lot of friends that use like, cause you'll see them flip too. Sometimes you'll see like they, she, and normally the one in front is the one that they
They prefer the most.
Yes, ma'am. So normally you'll just like flip back and forth. So like she went to the park, they had a good time. So like you'll just kind of flip back and forth between them. But some people do prefer that you use like the one that's in front. But most people just flip back and forth.
And I'm not calling you out because I didn't say that, right? But like, ma'am, I went to grad school in upstate New York, and the number of people I pissed off by using ma'am, right? Like, because Whereas outside of the South, it not only carries this gender thing, but it carries an ageist quality too, right? And so to think about like even the things we're saying today about pronouns and everything, I still use ma'am and sir, and I find like I can hear my mother in my head to say use ma'am and like some of these are deeply held like things, and I'm totally not.
So.
I'm curious because I was not raised in the South. I may never use my answer, but I do see everybody around the office is using it, and I do think I'm rude. So is there a way to say yes and acknowledge other? It's easy if the person has a title, yes doctor, so and so, yes president. But when there is no such honorary title, what would be a gender neutral way of acknowledging the relationship?
So I got asked this by a staff member the other day, right? Because so I'll just come out of the closet again in another way. I never think the staff should have to call me doctor. In fact, I have never been called doctor until I came to ULE. Just never used it. Just I had the PhD, but like as my father says, I'm a doctor who doesn't help people. So and so the way to think about this is, I was talking to the staff member and I said, if this faculty's requiring you to say doctor blah blah blah, are they then calling you Mr. or Ms. blah blah blah, right? Because like that respect has to go both ways. The short answer I would have is there's not an answer, right? I feel weird when people call me sir, right? Because I still think I'm 14, right? And I'm like, I'm not a sir, right? I think we just call people by their names, right? Like, I kind of think that there's a title list.
And that is an important statement to make, but there's a caveat that
Yes.
people historically need to take into consideration. Because my grandmother, my mother's mother was from the South. My father's family is also from the South. But my grandmother was from this South, Louisiana. So this portion of Louisiana. And she did not experience people calling her anything respectful. It was
Right.
their first name because she was in the time period she was born and of the ethnic group. So except in certain places in their community, they would have that. And so that's something you need to take into consideration. There are not people culturally that are comfortable with calling on by their first name, or not using some kind of indicator of Mr., Mrs., whatever. That's culture. So again, but this is perfect because this shows us that this is an educational process and it's complicated. There's no one size fits all, whatever. We're consistently and continuously evolving as far as policies, whatever, and it's not easy.
Right.
And so I respect how you approach doctor, but I also respect how other people approach those different. And you're exactly right with yes sir and no sir, whatever. When I first came here, it was like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean? What do you mean, sir?
I think I
Some
called
of my
you
students
names,
were
right?
older than me. I said, what you? And then I was told, come here, had nothing to do with it's respect for the position that you're in. I said, oh, okay, I'll take that then, But my point is, you're continuously learning, so you have to be open to continuously learning, and it is. It gets more complicated. It's not cut and dry. When you want to learn one thing, then it's like, oh, but there's this, and then you learn that and say, okay, and then there's, however, there's this, and then you learn that. So it's not easy. It's complicated and it's continuous. You never arrive. It's a journey that you're always on, and hopefully you will continue to take these journeys with us and be at our next lunch and learn. Like the way I ended that right quick.
Can I just say one? I'm sorry. I don't.
That's okay,
Yeah,
Will. We know how.
Yeah. I do want to follow up on what Dr. Salisbury said, right? Which is I use doctor because if I use doctor, then I give cover to like women and racial minorities, historically excluded people, right? Like I have authority because of the beard and the whiteness of my skin, no matter what I do, right? So I've never talked to anything about doctor. I think I'm afraid to call you. Anyways, thank you for inviting me.
But yeah, and like I said, it's complicated.
It is.
And you're exactly right. It just depends. It's complicated. It's cultural. There's a lot of things, and it behooves us all to learn, and not make assumptions to learn. And we ask but you're right, and you can ask my students, I always call them Mr. or Miss, and that's because mutual respect. Because I knew without them, I didn't have a job, okay?
Thank you all.
Thank you.